People always said we had the perfect life. Greg and I lived on the edge of a quiet rural town where the sky stretched endlessly, and the eucalyptus trees whispered secrets in the wind. He was the kind of husband everyone envied, handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, endlessly reliable, and fiercely loyal. He fixed broken fences before they could splinter, remembered to fill my gas tank, and brought me wildflowers every now and then. I smiled, cooked, kissed him goodnight. From the outside, it looked idyllic, but inside, I was sinking. Greg worked long days managing a vineyard. When he came home, he was tired, emotionally vacant, eyes dulled by the day. We talked, sure, but only about bills, the irrigation system, or how many roos he'd had to chase off the property. Nothing real. The silence between us had grown roots. I wasn't unhappy, exactly, just forgotten. Then came Bucky. We found him tangled in a barbed wire fence one morning, barely breathing. A baby kangaroo, soft and trembling, no bigger than a house cat. Greg pried him free, and I held him wrapped in my sweater all the way to the vet. They said he'd need care, around-the-clock feeding, warmth, and time. Greg hesitated. I insisted. Bucky became my shadow. I bottle-fed him, bathed him in sunlight, whispered to him while Greg was out in the fields. At first, it was maternal. Natural. But he grew quickly, sleek, strong, with thick lashes and eyes that followed me like he understood things no one else did. Silly, I know. But after weeks of sharing quiet mornings and silent confessions, it began to feel like something more. Greg didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care to look. He was busy, always so busy. I'd try to tell him about my day, about Bucky learning to open the back door or bounding like mad through the orchard. He'd smile, distracted, and mumble, "That's nice." Then drift back to his work emails or weather updates. One evening, as twilight wrapped the porch in golden shadow, I sat with Bucky curled at my feet and Greg across from me, absently scrolling on his phone. I realized I hadn't felt seen in months. Not really. Not like when Bucky looked at me, expectant, present, waiting. I reached out and stroked his fur without thinking, and he pressed his head against my palm. That single gesture felt more intimate than the last dozen kisses from my husband. I blinked, heart racing. What was I doing? Greg didn't look up that night. As we lay side by side in bed with inches of silence between us, I stared at the ceiling and thought about connection. About touch. About how easily love can become a habit instead of a feeling. That I wasn't in love with Bucky, of course. Not yet. But I was no longer sure I was in love with Greg either, and that terrified me more than anything. At first, they were harmless, murmured endearments spoken into the soft fur behind Bucky's ears. I'd laugh to myself afterward, shaking my head. Just cabin fever, I told myself. Too much solitude, not enough conversation. But the habit grew like ivy, twining through my thoughts, then around my days. I told Bucky everything, my dreams, my fears, my ache to be touched without being hurried. He'd blink those long lashes and lean in, his silence more comforting than any words Greg had offered in months. The loneliness sharpened. Greg had always been a man of action, not sentiment. He built fences, he paid the bills, he showed up. But he didn't see me. Not anymore. Not the way Bucky did, alert, attuned, present. It sounds ridiculous. I know that. I knew that. But logic had stopped applying long before the first time I let Bucky into the house without telling Greg that it was raining hard, and I couldn't bear to leave him out in the shed. I dried him with a towel, wrapped him in a blanket, and curled up beside him on the couch. That night, for the first time in months, I felt warm. Held. Whole. And I slept better than I had in ages. Greg noticed the fur on the cushions but didn't ask. Or maybe he didn't want to know. Soon, Bucky had his own spot inside. He'd nap beside me while I read or scroll through old pictures, photos of Greg and me when our love had color and laughter. Sometimes I'd try to spark those moments again, cooking his favorite meals or surprising him with a kiss on the cheek. He'd smile, thank me, then go water the vines or check the forecast. I started to feel invisible in my own home. One night, while Greg worked late on tax forms, I stayed up watching old romance movies. Bucky nestled beside me, head on my lap. I ran my fingers through his soft fur without thinking, and he sighed, actually sighed. I whispered something absurd like, "At least you appreciate me," and when his head turned toward mine, the room felt electric. No lines had been crossed, not yet. But I was tiptoeing on the edge, balancing between reality and something far stranger. And I didn't want to step back. By now, Greg had stopped noticing where I slept. I often stayed on the couch, because Bucky gets anxious in storms. He didn't argue. Maybe he was grateful for the space. Sometimes, as I lay next to Bucky in the dim light of early morning, I imagined he was something more. A confidant. A secret lover. Something human, and still, I told myself I was only lonely, that I wasn't cheating. Not really. At least, not yet, but deep down, in the quiet spaces where honesty lives, I knew something sacred had already shifted. It happened on a Sunday evening, after a family dinner that lingered longer than usual. The rain had started just as the plates were being cleared, turning the garden into a blur of silver. Everyone else had left early, citing the weather. Rafiq had offered to drop his parents home. Adil stayed behind to help clean up. That I should have gone upstairs. I should have busied myself, avoided the quiet. But I stayed. We moved around the kitchen in silence. I dried the plates while he rinsed them, our arms occasionally brushing, sending jolts through the air like static. The room was warm from the stove, but I felt a different kind of heat beneath my skin, restless and rising. He handed me a glass, our fingers touching just a second too long. "You look tired," he said softly, not accusing, not pitiful, just observant. "Not tired," I replied, avoiding his gaze. "Just hollow." The word surprised even me. Adil turned off the faucet. The kitchen filled with the hush of rain tapping on the windows. "I think about you more than I should," he said. There it was, plain, unadorned, irreversible. I should have walked away. I should have said something that closed the space between us, not widened it. Instead, I whispered, "Me too." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed. He stepped closer. No one raised a hand. No one made a sound. But something unspoken cracked open between us. His lips met mine. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't frenzied. It was slow, deliberate, like a truth finally spoken. My body responded before my mind could protest. I felt alive in a way that frightened me, every nerve tuned to the electricity of the forbidden. We didn't go far that night. No clothes were shed, no bedsheets stained. But the kiss, long, lingering, dangerous, was enough. It shattered the illusion I had clung to, the fragile story I told myself that it was all just emotional, just imagination. When Rafiq returned, I was already upstairs, lights off, pretending to sleep. He kissed my forehead, tucked the blanket around me, and whispered, "You're everything to me." I turned away, blinking hard, trying to swallow the storm in my chest. The next morning, Adil didn't message. The silence was louder than any word. He hadn't just stepped away, he had shut the door behind him. I went through the motions with Rafiq, breakfast, prayers, smiles. But I felt like a thief in my own home, stealing warmth from a man who still looked at me like I was his miracle, and yet, even in the guilt, part of me still burned with the memory of that kiss. Not because it was right, but because it revealed everything I was missing. By nightfall, I sat alone in the dark, repeating one sentence in my head: it wasn't supposed to happen. But now that it has, what comes next? Adil never mentioned the kiss again. He didn't text, didn't linger at gatherings, didn't meet my eyes across the room. He had vanished, not physically, but emotionally, retreating behind a wall I couldn't breach. Whether it was guilt or regret that drove him away, I never knew. All I knew was that I had been left to carry the weight alone. Rafik noticed the change. Of course he did. He wasn't stupid, just trusting. He asked, gently at first, if something was wrong. I denied it. Then came the careful questions. Had he done something? Was I tired? Unwell? Each time, I shook my head, offered tired smiles, blamed the weather, the workload, hormones, anything but the truth. What was I supposed to say? That I'd betrayed him in the most cowardly way? That I'd longed for a man who disappeared the moment I leaned in? One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Rafik handed me a cup of tea. No words, just a simple gesture. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the kindness I had once loved. His eyes were tired, rimmed with the quiet ache of someone holding onto something slipping through his fingers. I may not be exciting, he said, as if reading my silence, but I've always tried to be enough. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with shame that I and the days that followed. I tried to reclaim what I had taken for granted. I laughed at his jokes again. I asked about his day. I touched his hand during meals. But it all felt rehearsed, like trying to paint over cracks in a foundation already broken. Adil stayed distant. Eventually, he stopped coming to family events altogether. Rumors floated, something about a new relationship, work stress. I didn't ask. I couldn't afford to want more. Still, at night, when the house fell silent, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, haunted not by what we did, but by what it revealed. The kiss had opened a wound, but the silence afterward carved the scar. I had gambled with something precious for a feeling that vanished as quickly as it came. Rafik would sometimes reach for my hand in his sleep, and I would let him. Not because I deserved his affection, but because I needed the illusion of forgiveness, if only for a moment. That I never told him, not because I was afraid of his anger, but because I knew it would destroy the one thing that still held us together, his belief in me. And so I lived between two truths: the comfort of a man who loved me completely, and the memory of a man who made me feel briefly unforgettable. Desire had a price, and I had paid it in silence. Sometimes, in the quiet, I still ask myself, what matters more, being loved gently, or being wanted fiercely, even if only for a moment? I haven't found the answer, but I'm still here, pretending I never